Hello, true crimeers. You know what they say? Couples who kill together, they go to prison together. Well, no, not really. They go to separate prisons. A men's prison, a woman's prison, unless they're a gay couple. But usually, they probably separate them still. What am I saying? Oh, this is another compilation video. I know, shocker. I think I'm getting close to the end. I say that every video, I think. No, I don't. But I'm probably not. But maybe I am. Anyway, what am I saying? Oh, this is a video from a playlist on my TikTok page. It's just called Couples/Friends. So this is like mainly videos where either couples kill people together, or friends, or a group of people kill together. I don't know what I'm doing half the time on TikTok. So yeah, this is gonna be probably one of my longest compilations. This one has 30 videos in it. Because I'm desperately trying to get these all over before the page is gone. So this could be a long one, folks. So yay or oh, I'm not sure how you feel, but it is what it is. Anyway, without further ado, here are 30 cases of couples/friends/groups who murder together. Yeah, viewer discretion is advised. She looked a little different, so she needed to die because of it. Right? Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Sophie Lancaster. Viewer discretion is advised. Sophie, who was 20 years old at the time of this story, was born on November 26, 1986, and she lived with her family in Lancashire, England. She had been dating Robert Maltby for about 3 years. The two of them dressed in goth clothing and makeup, but the two of them were described as both being very good, very responsible people, and this is just a culture they love to embrace and just sort of be a part of. Both their families would say that neither of them ever had or caused any troubles, but the goth subculture basically would create problems for them, meaning that there would be altercations from people just simply based on how they were dressed. In the very early morning hours of August 11th, 2007, the couple was walking past this skate park, which is located near Stubby Park in Lancashire, England. Sometime shortly after 1 a.m., they had noticed a group of about 5 teenagers near the skate park. Well, as Robert and Sophie were walking by, this group decided to follow them. They were like laughing and snickering and making little comments. And then, well, they attacked the couple, physically assaulted them. They were punching them, they were kicking them. They were mainly going after Robert first. And it got to a point where Robert was so badly beaten that he was knocked unconscious. And Sophie, wanting to protect her boyfriend from more harm, decided to shield him and basically went on top of him. But these teenage boys didn't stop. They just kept punching, and they were then punching and kicking Sophie. They did so until she was unconscious. Thankfully, some passerbys noticed. They called authorities right away, and the 5 teenagers ran. Both were taken to the hospital. Sophie had gone into a coma, and she never woke up. She died 13 days later in the hospital. Robert was also in a coma, but he would eventually wake up, and he would survive his injuries. The 5 teenage boys would immediately start bragging to their friends that they just beat up a bunch of goth kids. So the friends they told ratted them out, and these 5 teenage boys were all arrested. They ranged from 15 years to 17 years old. Ryan Herbert and Brendan Harris were convicted of the murder. Both boys were given life in prison with parole after 16 years possible. The other 3 were given a max of about 5 years, just because she was goth. So many of you have requested I cover the story of Bundy, so here you go. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Carol Bundy, who was a part of the Sunset Killers. Viewer discretion is advised. Carol Bundy was born on August 26, 1942, and she lived in California with her family. Growing up, life, for her, it sucked. It was bad. Her parents were both extremely abusive. They constantly drank. When she was about 11 years old, her father started to sexually assault her. She was in and out of foster homes, and quite honestly, she just did not stand a chance. She had a few marriages that would end in divorce. By the very late 70s, she ended up having an affair with a man by the name of Jack Murray. He was a country music singer, but he also ran a small apartment complex. Now, he was married, but Carol kept trying to get him to, leave his wife, but he wouldn't do it. Now, when he did little gigs at small venues, Carol would always be there, and at one of these venues, she met Lurch, otherwise known as Doug Clark. They became fast friends, and they both realized that they were creeps. They ended up moving into an apartment together, and they would have, ladies of the night come over. And then Doug revealed that he was really into an 11-year-old girl in the neighborhood. So Carol, instead of going, "Oh God, you what?" she helped lure the 11-year-old child into their apartment. She assisted him in taking photographs of the young girl. Now, that young girl would luckily survive. But Doug Clark would tell Carol, "Hey, can you go get some guns for me, because I want to kill some people whilst I'm having intercourse with them." Again, Carol should be like, "Whoa, no." But she was like, "Okay." In June of 1980, Doug said to Carol, "Hey, I picked up 2 teenage girls earlier, and I killed them." He said they were runaways, and he shot them both in the back of the head, brought them to a nearby garage where he assaulted sexually their corpses. And then he just threw them on the side of the road. 12 days later, he repeats the process with 2 more prostitutes. But this time he cut off one of their heads, put it in a box where they would later store it in their freezer, where Carol would put makeup on it. Doug then revealed he had actually killed someone 3 weeks prior to all of these. Her body was found 3 weeks later. Remember Jack Murray? Well, Carol lured him to her van one night. This one. Jealous that she couldn't have him, she shot him dead and cut off his head. And then she called police and confessed to all of it. Both got convicted of their crimes. Doug got the death penalty. He got 50 years but died in prison. They thought they were going to rob the McDonald's for $200,000. They only got $2,000. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Sydney River McDonald's massacre. Viewer discretion is advised. On the late evening of May 7th, 1992, in Sydney River, which is in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Canada, 3 employees of a McDonald's were closing down the restaurant for the night and getting ready to go home. One employee was actually on his way to work to do the overnight shift. In the building at the time this incident started was 22-year-old Donna Warren, 29-year-old Neil Burrows, and 20-year-old Arlene McNeil. 27-year-old Jimmy Fagone was actually on his way in a cab to work. 19-year-old Derek Wood had also been working there that evening, but he had gone home a couple hours prior. Before he went home, he left something behind, a backpack, which he put to prop open the basement door. Donna's in the back office counting the cash down. Neil was in the kitchen cleaning everything. And then a little after midnight, all of a sudden, 3 men come back into the McDonald's through the basement, all wielding weapons. 2 of the men were wearing masks or some sort of disguise. One of them was not. 18-year-old Derek Wood just went in there with no mask. The robbers came upon Donna and Arlene. They recognized Derek right away because he had just left the work building not but a couple hours prior. Donna looked at Derek and said, "Is this supposed to be funny?" And then he pointed the gun at Arlene's head and shot her through the face. She fell to the ground but was still alive. 23-year-old Freeman McNeil, who's not related to Arlene, stood over Arlene holding a broken handle. Derek then commanded his friend Freeman and their friend Darren Mize to go to the safe and get the money. Derek then went to the kitchen where Neil Burrows was cleaning, and then he just shot him through the head. And then Darren came downstairs and stabbed Neil through the neck. Neil wouldn't die, so they shot him again through the head, which then ended his life, which is this gentleman right here, by the way. They then grabbed Donna because they realized they then needed her to open the safe. They brought her to the office. She opened the safe for them, and then they just shot her through the head and then through the eye, killing her. The safe had $2,017. Derek had told his friends that they would be getting away with $200,000. Not sure where he thought that amount came from. As the three men are trying to leave, that's when Jimmy Fagone comes in, not knowing what happened. They just shot him through the head. They shot him through the head and they fled. His taxi driver saw the men running, went in and went to go help the people in there, which saved Arlene's life. She would actually recover. When police arrived, they noticed there was a backpack in the basement near the door. Around that same time, a young man called the McDonald's saying, "Hey, I was just at the McDonald's, I heard gunshots, and I took off, and my backpack got left behind, so if you see it, that's why it's there." It was Derek, trying to cover for the fact that, oops, I left my backpack behind. They weren't really listening to him. They said, "All right, we'll talk to you tomorrow." He then went to the McDonald's that night and said, "Listen, I just called, I left my backpack there, so I just want to let you know, I was here, I heard gunshots, and I ran, and I was smoking cigarettes out there, and just, ugh." The problem was, he said he was smoking, but there was no cigarette butts anywhere near that door, inside or out. Police then brought him to the station where they started to question him. And the more he answered the questions, the more they became suspicious of him. So they asked him to take a polygraph test. At first he said, "No, I'm not going to do that. Okay, maybe I should. Maybe I should. It looks bad if I say I'm not going to do it. And I could probably beat a polygraph test, right?" No, he did not. And that's when everything just started to fall apart for him. And he ended up throwing his two friends under the bus. And all three of them would be arrested for the triple homicide and the attempted murder of another, not to mention the robbery. Derek Wood was convicted of all of his charges and was sentenced to 25 years to life, where he still remains today. He was last denied parole in 2015. Darren Mize would plead guilty instead of going to trial. He pled guilty to second-degree murder. He was given 20 years to life. He was fully paroled and released in 2012, but he was forbidden to ever go to Sydney, Nova Scotia again. And finally, Freeman McNeil was convicted of all of his charges and was sentenced to 25 years to life. As recently as 2019, he is still in prison, but was granted like temporary release days, where he is allowed to leave prison unescorted one time a month. The only survivor of the attack, Arlene McNeil, she passed away in 2018 at the age of 46. One couple would be arrested in Maryland for breaking into a bar. And on their person, they found the IDs of two missing people. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Sifrits. Viewer discretion is advised. Pictured here was 51-year-old Jeannie Crutchley and her 32-year-old boyfriend, Joshua Ford. They had been dating for about a year and a half, 2 years or so, and had just moved in together a year prior to this. The two of them lived in Fairfax, Virginia, and they decided to take a little vacation to Ocean City, Maryland. It was Memorial Day weekend, and they had rented a condo to stay in. On the evening of May 25th, 2002, Jeannie and Joshua went out for a night of fun. To get to where they were going that night, they took a bus, and that is where they met another couple, Benjamin and Erica Sifrit. They had known of a cool little bar called Secrets. So the four of them had gone there, had some drinks, had a great time, and then afterwards, the Sifrits invited Jeannie and Joshua over to their condo. And after that evening, no one had ever seen Jeannie and Joshua again. A few days later, on May 31st, 2002, the Sifrits were caught at a Hooters bar breaking in and trying to steal some stuff. Their car was backed up to the back of the restaurant, but police arrived after the silent alarm went off and the two of them were arrested. Erica said she was having a panic attack and needed her medicine that was in her purse, so police got the purse and began looking for the medicine. In the purse, they also found the IDs of 2 missing people who were reported missing a week prior, Joshua Ford and Jeannie Crutchley. Erica and Benjamin Sifrit refused to say where they got the IDs from. But because of this, police were given a warrant to search the Sifrits' condo. And it was a treasure trove. They found spent bullets. They found traces of blood running down the walls of the bathroom. They found clumped hair with blood down the drain of their sink. They found a bullet hole in the wall of their bathroom. This is a close-up shot of it. They also found a stack of photographs. In it was a photograph of Erica Sifrit wearing a ring around her neck, the exact ring that belonged to Jeannie Crutchley. Not to mention the mountain of cleaning supplies they had. With the overwhelming evidence of something happening there, Erica spilled the beans, and she agreed to testify against her husband. Erica claimed that back at their condo, they accused Jeannie and Joshua of trying to steal Erica's purse, and then an altercation happened. They then shot and killed the couple, dismembered their bodies, and disposed of their body parts everywhere. Only portions of their bodies have ever been found. Erica got life, he got 38 years. Snitches get stitches, a young woman would say, before bashing in the head of a friend. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Kimberly Jo Dotts. Viewer discretion is advised. Kimberly was a 15-year-old girl who lived in the Clearfield, Pennsylvania area. She was described as a very sweet girl who could make friends with literally anyone, and that she was a joy to be around, and she always had a smile on her face, and she could always make others smile. Kimberly was also allegedly part of a group that called themselves the Runaways, a group of teenagers between the ages of like 14 and 18. Now, in May of 1998, this group was allegedly planning to relocate or run away from their home in Clearfield, Pennsylvania, down to Florida. The group had gone to a place that was named Gallows Harbor. This location was named after a hanging in the 19th century. Allegedly, this group had some weird initiation procedure where they would take a rope and a noose and sling it around a tree, and each of them would take turns by just putting the noose around their neck for a minute and then, getting out of it. Well, according to some of the friends, Kimberly decided that she did not want to run away. And some of the group's members decided, well, that means she's going to tell on us. And snitches get stitches. So when it was Kimberly's turn to put the noose around her neck, she did so. And that is when her friend, Jessica Holtmeyer, grabbed hold of the rope, and along with her boyfriend, 18-year-old Aaron Straw, they slung Kimberly up into the tree, which would cause her to actually hang. Now, a lot of the friends began to run away, some stayed and just watched. Kimberly's toes were literally just dragging against the ground and she was crying. It got to a point where they decided to let her drop to the ground, where it appeared she was not breathing very well. Gee, go figure. As Kimberly gasped for air as she continued to try to live, Jessica would grab a nearby rock, no, not this one, and began to bludgeon Kimberly over the head. She did so until she was dead. All because they said, well, she was just gonna tell on us that we were gonna run away. Fuck off. Several people from the group were arrested, but it was really Jessica and her boyfriend Aaron that were charged with murder. The 16-year-old would be convicted, and she was sentenced to life without parole. Aaron was also sentenced to life without parole. When she was older, she would try to go to the Supreme Court by saying, well, I was a minor when I killed her, so I should get less time. Go piss on yourself. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, however, told her to go shove it, and she will be in prison for the rest of her life. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Brian Glick. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, unfortunately, I have no photos of Brian, and I have no photos of his killers. There is almost nothing on this poor guy's story, so we will make do. Brian was born on April 25th, 1972, and he lived in Bloomington, Minnesota. In 1992, he began to work at a Subway, and I believe this is the exact one based on the address. He was just trying to make ends meet so that he could afford to pay for the wedding he planned with his fiancée. Brian was also in school to become a paramedic. Now, back in 1990, doctors would discover that Brian had a benign brain tumor. By early 1992, he had the tumor successfully removed, and his recovery was going well, but he was very early in the healing process when this story happened. On the night of October 25th, 1993, Brian was working at the subway. He was working there alone that evening, and he called his fiancée around 11 o'clock to let her know that he's almost done with the day. A few minutes after that, he closes up the store. He goes out to the back to throw away the garbage, and when he does that, as he walks back in the building, he is assaulted. Two men by the name of Michael Olson and Dennis Tate had been hiding behind a dumpster waiting for him. Now, Michael Olson used to work at this subway, but then he had been fired shortly before this. He actually knew Brian pretty well, and he was very familiar with where they kept the money. The two men choked Brian, and they beat him in the head. He was beaten so badly that his face was completely mangled and no one could recognize him. The two assailants then walked into the subway and stole $152. They then destroyed the surveillance cameras, and then they fled. Sometime shortly after 11:30, Brian's fiancée would come to the store to pick him up. When she peered inside the building, she didn't see anyone, and Brian never came to the door, so she called police. And that's when they discovered Brian in the back of the store. He was rushed to the hospital, but he would end up dying. What had happened was a part of the skull that was in the healing process was damaged, and then it pressed into his brain. And that was because of the severe beating to his head, and that is what caused his death. 2 days later, the two pieces of garbage were arrested because they were investigating previous employees who were fired. At Michael Olson's house, they found a bloody t-shirt, so he was arrested, and then he ratted out Dennis Tate. Both of them would end up confessing. Michael Olson was given a 27-year sentence. Dennis Tate was given 25 years. By 2011, both men have been released. 6 teenage monsters wanted to upgrade their vehicle. Apparently that had to come at the expense of an entire family. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Lillelid murders. Viewer discretion is advised. Vidar Lillelid was born and raised in Norway, but by 1985 he moved to the United States. By 1989, he had met and married Delphina. They had actually met at a church service because they were both Jehovah's Witnesses. The two of them would go on to have 2 kids. They had a daughter named Tabitha and a son named Peter. By 1997, Tabitha was 6 years old and Peter was 2 years old. In the late evening of April 6, 1997, the Lillelid family was on their way home from a Jehovah's Witness service. At one point, the family needed to stop off at a rest stop in Greene County, Tennessee, and the family was in this exact van. Unfortunately, at the same time they pulled into the rest stop, so did these 6 monsters. Natasha Cornett, Dean Mullins, Joseph Reisner, Crystal Sturgill, Jason Bryant, and Karen Howell. The youngest of them was 14, the oldest was 20. They had come from Pikeville, Kentucky, and apparently they were driving a piece of crap car that was nearly broken down. So one of them decided, we need to upgrade our vehicle. And then that is when they pulled into the rest stop in Tennessee, and they noticed the Lillelid family in their van. Apparently, a couple of them from the group approached Vidar, who was holding Peter at the time, and they started talking about their religion. But then Joseph Reisner pulled out his 9mm handgun and said, I hate to do this to you, but we need to take your van. And we're gonna need to take you guys with us. So at gunpoint, and they had 2 guns on them, they kidnapped the family, forced them in the van, drove them down a rural road, forced them out of the vehicle, and put bullets into all 4 members of the family. One of them noticed that some of the members of the family were still alive, so they put more bullets into them. The family was soon discovered, and by a miracle, 2-year-old Peter, who had been shot twice, was still alive. Sadly, the other 3 members of the family were all dead. This was the 90s, so people, of course, began speculating this was a sort of witchcraft thing. This was done by devil worshippers. A few days later, the 6 assailants were caught at the Mexico-Arizona border in the stolen van. This wasn't witchcraft. This was just 6 young people who did a very stupid thing. All of them were given 3 life sentences without parole. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Shoeshine Boy Murder. Viewer discretion is advised. This was 12-year-old Emmanuel Jacques. He lived in Toronto, Canada, and he was born to Portuguese immigrant parents who were from the Azores. The family lived and worked near Yonge Street, which was in downtown Toronto. It was a part of Toronto that was becoming a more classy part of town, but it still had a very seedy nature to it. You know, there was like a bunch of new businesses coming in, trying to reestablish the area as a good area to be in. Emmanuel and his brother, they worked as shoeshine boys. They would go to a busy street corner and, you know, shine shoes. One day he asked his parents if he could go to a different corner of Yonge Street where there were more potential clients, you know, to make more money for the family. His parents begrudgingly said yes. And sadly, that would be a decision they would come to regret. Emmanuel went to the corner of this building, the Brown Derby Tavern. And this was on July 28th, 1977. It was very busy, and again, this was in a very not so great area. There were a lot of sex shops, corn places, and when Emmanuel never got home, his parents obviously became immediately worried and reported him missing. A few days after Emmanuel disappeared, this man, Saul Batesh, who was a known sex worker in the area, he reached out to a friend, and he said he knew where the body of Emmanuel Jacques was. His friend, who he called, told him to lawyer up, but also to confess, and he did. I don't want to show too many negative words here, but there is a building called Charlie's Angels, which was like a massage shop. You know, yeah. And on the roof of that building, police would discover the body of 12-year-old Emmanuel Jacques. 27-year-old Saul Batesh would tell authorities that he and his friends lured the 12-year-old boy with the promise of paying him $35 to help move some stuff. But Saul, who then ratted out his 3 friends, Robert Cribbs, Joseph Woods, and Werner Gruner, they would restrain the young boy and then they would take turns repeatedly sexually assaulting the young boy. They did this for about 12 hours. They then realized they had no choice but to kill him because he would rat them out. So while they restrained his arms and legs, one of them would shove his face into a sink full of water and drown him. So the 4 men were formally arrested and charged with murder. Saul Batesh, Robert Cribbs, and Joseph Woods were all found guilty and got life in prison. Werner Gruner was acquitted. There was no proof to show he helped commit the murder. A teenage girl just wanted to have a little night of fun with her friends. But you're on my page, so we all know that's not what happened. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Heather Rich. Viewer discretion is advised. Heather was a 16-year-old girl who lived here in the little city of Waurika, Oklahoma. She was a cheerleader at Waurika High School, and she was described as a fiery little pistol, someone with a lot of energy, a lot of spunk, a big heart, a lot of love to give. But Heather was also a teenager, and teenagers usually go through a troubled spell at some point. Shortly before this case began, she got into a fight with her mom over like a really expensive phone bill that she had mainly racked up. She had also sort of began to dabble in like, you know, smoking pot. You know, just normal teenagers from the 90s type things. Nothing crazy. By all accounts, she was a great kid. At approximately 11 p.m. on October 2nd, 1996, Heather would sneak away from her house to meet a boy. That boy was 17-year-old senior Joshua Bagwell. With him that night were his friends 19-year-old Curtis Gambill and also 19-year-old Randy Wood. On Joshua's property, there was a trailer that he slept in. The 4 friends were hanging out inside the trailer, and at some point, Curtis and Randy would leave so that Joshua and Heather could spend like an hour or 2 together. About an hour later, the two friends came back to the trailer, and Joshua and Heather were both very drunk. They were also both very naked. Josh had told his two male friends that me and Heather, well, we did the deed, which he said was consensual. Then, when all three boys were intoxicated, they then made the decision to take advantage of Heather Rich. The three of them then took turns sexually assaulting Heather. She was in and out of consciousness, but when she finally came to, she was screaming. So the trio of boys began to panic, and they told themselves, well, we only have one decision now. The trio of boys would then take Heather, load her in Joshua's pickup truck, and take her to this bridge, which is just above Belknap Creek. Then, armed with a shotgun, and this is one of the shells found at the crime scene, Joshua brought Heather to the edge of the bridge and began to shoot her while she was lying face down. And then he just chucked her over the bridge and into the creek. She was reported missing, but her partially decomposed body was found 8 days later. She had been shot approximately 19 times, including once in the back of the head. The boys were arrested. Wood got 25 to life. Bagwell got life without parole. What started as a robbery and carjacking would turn into a horrific murder in South Africa. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Hannah Cornelius. Viewer discretion is advised. Hannah was a 21-year-old student from Stellenbosch, South Africa. On the night of May 27th, 2017, Hannah was out for a night of fun with her 21-year-old friend, Cheslin Marsh. After the evening was over, Cheslin was going to take his skateboard and go home, but Hannah said, you know what, it's super late, because it was like around 3 o'clock in the morning. She said, I'll give you a ride home, so he happily accepted that. At approximately 3:20 in the morning, you can see Hannah's blue Volkswagen pull into the parking lot of Cheslin's building. Around that same time, you can see 4 men kind of lingering around that same parking lot. Those 4 men were Nashville Julius, Geraldo Parsons, Eben Van Nykirk, and Vernon Witbowie. I may have said some of their names wrong, but honestly I don't care because they're scum. They too were out on a night of fun, but their night of fun was significantly different than Hannah and Cheslin's. They were looking to rob someone. So when they saw Hannah and Cheslin pull in, they began to approach them. As Cheslin was trying to get out of the car, he had a knife pressed against his back all of a sudden, where a man's voice said, if you do anything, we'll kill her. They had already had a screwdriver put towards the neck of Hannah. They forced both of them into the back seat of the car, began to steal whatever they could. Then they decided, you know what, let's just steal the car too. A few minutes later, the car is no longer in the parking lot. About 4:34 in the morning now, the car is now seen at a gas station. And allegedly, you could see Hannah in the passenger side of the vehicle. At some point in between, they took Cheslin and they forced him in the trunk of the car. Between 5:30 a.m. and 6 a.m., they then take Cheslin out of the vehicle, beat the living crap out of him, tie his hands behind his back, dump him in the woods, and they thought they had killed him. They didn't. The 4 men then take Hannah to a desolate location where then 3 of the men sexually assault her back to back to back. They then force her back into her vehicle, drive another 12 miles down the road to another secluded area. And by the way, at this point, she is in the trunk. When they try to force her out of the trunk, when they stop, she's grabbing on, hanging on for dear life, terrified. So they stabbed her in the neck. They then dragged her to a remote area. They then took this boulder and smashed it into her skull, killing her instantly. And she was just found in a field. The 4 men went on to rob another woman, got into a chase with cops, and were arrested. They were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Alpha Dog is a 2006 film based on a true story. And it's a pretty good movie. But here is that story. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Nick Markowitz. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, this story actually begins with his brother, Ben Markowitz, and they lived in San Fernando Valley in California. There was nothing off about the family. They were all very respected. That is until Ben decided to get involved in some local gangs. And one of those gangs was led by this man, Jesse James Hollywood. For fuck's sakes. Now, Mr. Hollywood, he grew up in a very affluent family as well. Very respected, and he was on his way to a great sports career. But then he hurt his back, so he said, you know what I should do instead? Sell drugs! The obvious backup plan. Well, then it got to a point where Ben Markowitz owed Hollywood money, somewheres around $1,200. And Ben, he couldn't pay up. Ben's little brother, 15-year-old Nick Markowitz, he loved his brother. He was also doing really well in high school. He was a theater kid, and he had zero involvement in Ben's wrongdoings. But apparently that didn't matter. Right in the middle of the afternoon of August 6, 2000, Nick Markowitz was out on the street just taking a walk, when 21-year-old Jesse Rouge and another person named William Skidmore, they drove their van right up next to Nick Markowitz and kidnapped him. You see, the two of them worked for Mr. Hollywood. Witnesses saw this happen. Police were immediately called, but they could not find the vehicle based on the license plate number the witness had. For the next couple of days, his captors actually treated him, well, like a friend, I guess. He played video games, he watched movies, he partied with them. He was just kind of naive and said, it's okay, I'm doing this for my brother. I'll be okay, I'll be returned. He even kind of made friends with a couple of them. But then JJH here, well, apparently he asked a lawyer, and he found out that kidnapping wasn't so great, and he could go away for a long time for it. You needed to ask a lawyer for that? So he decided that Nick Markowitz needed to be killed, but he wouldn't do it himself. He asked Jesse Rouge to do it. He said no. So he asked 21-year-old Ryan Hoyt to do it for him. Hoyt also owed him money. He said, if you do this, then we're even Stevens. So Hoyt, Rouge, and 17-year-old Graham Presley, they took him to Lizard's Head Trail, dug a hole, forced him inside, and they shot him 10 times until he was dead. He was found 2 days later. They were arrested within a week. Hoyt was sentenced to death. He got 11 years. He was found 6 years later. He got life. A teenager would commit a murder, and then his mother would help cover it up. Family! Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Jamie Kelley and Abby Worrell. Viewer discretion is advised. Jamie and Abby were two 16-year-old best friends living in Pataskala, Ohio. Unfortunately, I cannot find much personal information about either of them. Even their obituaries are blank. In the very early morning hours of September 25th, 1994, Abby and Jamie were hanging out. They were hanging out at Abby's house, and then they were planning to sneak out of the house that morning with two of their male friends, Bobby Sheets and Robert Daniel, whose pictures I do not have. And also with them that morning was another friend by the name of Jennifer Patrick. Again, photo I do not have. They would drive over to the house of Bobby Sheets, and at that time his mother Elsie was there, and also at the house was another friend named Sonia Hawkins. The friends then decide to go to a nearby cemetery to hang out. That's kind of what we did in the 90s, yeah. Don't judge us. They hung out there for a little bit, and then they decided to go back to Bobby's house. Now, on the way to the house, Robert Daniel told Bobby Sheets, let's kill them. And he was speaking about Abby and Jamie. Robert was apparently trying to get initiated into some gang where he had to kill someone to move up the ranks. Bobby had himself a concealed gun on his person. Robert knew that. Bobby claims that he did not want to participate in shooting anyone, but Robert grabbed his gun, Bobby didn't stop him, and he proceeded to shoot the girls. One of them was shot directly in the head and killed instantly. The other was shot 3 times but did not die instantly, and that was Abby. So they took a cinder block that was nearby and they bashed her head in until she was dead. They then just threw both girls in the trunk of their car and then just dumped them in a nearby barn. They then went back to the Sheets' house where they told Bobby's mom, Elsie, what they did. And instead of calling police, she helped cover up all of it. She cleaned their clothing, helped them hide the weapons. She helped clean up everything, and then afterwards, she made homemade pizza for all of them. On October 2nd, 1994, they then went to the barn where they left their bodies and set it on fire, which led authorities to their bodies. The boys and the mother would be arrested. It didn't take much to find out. The mom, Elsie, she got life in prison. Robert Sheets got 37 years to life, and Robert Daniel got life without parole. A mother would tell her son over the phone, "That's not Drew. Go get your gun and shoot him now." Hello, true crimeers. This is the insane case of Holly Bobo. Viewer discretion is advised. Holly was a 20-year-old nursing student who lived in Darden, Tennessee, and she was going to the University of Tennessee. In April of 2011, she was dating a man by the name of Drew Scott, a man who loved to hunt and liked to wear camo. On the morning of April 13th, 2011, a neighbor would report hearing screams coming from the Bobo property. The neighbor would call Holly's mother, Karen, who was at work, to let her know about the screams. At that same time, the dogs on the Bobo property began to bark. The barking woke up Holly's 25-year-old brother, Clint, and that's when Holly's mother called Clint to see what was going on, to ask, "Where is Holly?" Someone said she was screaming. Now, the property is large and the garage was pretty far away from where the brother was looking. But when he looked outside, he saw Holly kneeling down next to a man who was wearing camo. He assumed it was her boyfriend, Drew. He also said Holly's car is still in the garage. The thing is, Karen already knew that Drew could not have been the man that Holly was talking to by the garage. She knew he was out hunting turkeys a distance away. That is when she told her son on the phone, "Get your gun, that's not Drew, shoot him." Clint was like, "Whoa, I'm not going to go just shoot someone." He tries calling Holly's phone, but no one answers. He then sees the mysterious man with Holly walk away into the woods behind their property. And then Holly is never seen again. Police are called, they see blood by Holly's vehicle in the garage, which later is identified as Holly's blood. And they started searching right away for Holly and they could not find her anywhere. She was not answering her phone. They would later find her phone abandoned on the side of the road. On April 14th, they found a pair of Holly's underwear. They found Holly's inhaler. They found her purse and a lunchbox. Police God damn it, son of a bitch, that's terrifying. Police suspected a known sex offender in the area by the name of Terry Britt. But for some reason, he was never arrested. For some reason, and it's still not known why, they brought in a man by the name of Dylan Adams on the far right, where he told this wild story about he and his brother Zach and a friend by the name of Jason Autry. At one point, they said that Zach sexually assaulted Holly and he recorded it. But then Zach said, no, Dylan killed her. Then they said their friend Jason Autry was involved. Then there was another man by the name of Austin who became involved somehow. He said he would take authorities to where her body was, but when they went there, she was not there. He later ended his own life. Dylan was someone with a very low IQ, therefore he was very easy to coerce, which is what some people think happened. In 2014, Holly's body was found, and all three of these men were convicted of her murder. A double homicide on Easter, 4 people arrested, coerced confessions, planted evidence. Happy Easter, everyone. This one has it all. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Wayne and Sharmon Stock. Viewer discretion is advised. Pictured here is a 2-story farmhouse in Murdoch, Nebraska. This was the home of Wayne and Sharmon Stock. Wayne was a lifelong farmer who owned his own business, which was called the Stock Hay Company. At the time of this case, they had 3 adult children. They were a loving family. They were well loved in the community. The 2 of them just didn't have any enemies, which is why everyone would be so surprised on April 17th, 2006, Easter Sunday. One of their sons, Andrew, had entered the home, and he was kind of surprised at first because usually by that time, his parents are up and at him, they're cooking breakfast, they're getting ready for the day. But this day was eerily silent. Inside the house, his father, Wayne, had been shot through the head, and his mother, Sharmon, had been shot through her face. Both were murdered. When police were searching for evidence, they found something that did not seem to belong there, and that was this gold ring with the inscription, Always Corey and Ryan. These names had nothing to do with anyone in the Stock family. But police put this to the side for now. They first turned their attention to one of their nephews. His name was Matthew Livers. This one right here. Allegedly, he had some heated disputes over money with the now murdered couple, his aunt and uncle. So police brought him in, and they interrogated him. At first, he's saying, I had nothing to do with this. This is not me. By the way, he had the IQ of about 68. After several hours, he started to answer the questions the police officers were asking by feeding them information they had already fed to him. He was literally using their cues to answer the questions, which then they took as a confession. They pressed him more because they were convinced that this was two people. So he threw out a random name, Nicholas Sampson. So they brought him in and they arrested him. Now, they needed physical evidence to place them at the scene, but there wasn't any. That is until seasoned crime scene investigator David Kofod, he magically found blood in one of their cars, blood that matched the murdered couple. It would come out later that that evidence was planted. They were so sure of the two men's guilt because of the confession that, the investigation just needed a little nudge. Later down the road, he would be arrested and convicted of planting the evidence. You see, police went back to the ring. They found out this was a stolen item, stolen by these two folks, Gregory Fester and Jessica Reed. Jessica would then confess to the double homicide. It was random. They didn't know the couple. They both got life in prison. They were both released and had nothing to do with it. This is the case of Larissa Schuster. She was born on January 1st, 1960 in Missouri. Sometime around 1980, when Larissa was working in a nursing home, she met Tim Schuster, who was in nursing school. And in 1982, they got hitched. By 1990, they had 2 kids together. Fast forward to the year 2000, and they moved to Clovis, California, where by 2001, Larissa was making twice the salary that Tim was. And by 2002, they would go through a very ugly divorce, where they would fight for custody of their children, where Larissa would win full custody. On the morning of July 10th, 2003, Tim was late for a breakfast meeting. Later that same day, he was supposed to pick up his son from Larissa, but he never showed up for that either. Larissa then became a prime suspect. Police interviewed her, but there wasn't enough to charge her with anything. She clearly didn't care that Tim was missing, because she took the kids on a planned Disney World trip. Oh God. Sir, I think a porcupine died on your head. Okay. This is James Fagone? He was actually a lab assistant to Larissa. At one point, he helped Larissa break into her old home to get some of her belongings back. And while Larissa was on her trip to Disney World in Missouri, police interviewed him, and he made a confession. James said on the night of July 9th, 2003, Larissa successfully lured Tim out of his home, where they would then chloroform him and tase him to incapacitate him. They then, while he was still alive, dumped him in a 55-gallon vat of acid, and police would discover the barrel with the now liquefied body of Tim Schuster. James and Melissa were charged with kidnapping and first-degree murder, and Larissa was dubbed the Acid Lady. James was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole, and Larissa got the same fate. This is the case of Elytte and Miranda Barbour. Miranda and Elytte put an ad on Craigslist, basically offering to have intercourse with someone for money. On November 11th, 2013, 42-year-old Troy LaFerrara would answer that ad, in which Miranda offered her services for $100. On that same day, Miranda here met LaFerrara at the Susquehanna Valley Mall parking lot. He gave her the money. They then drove 6 miles to a small town called Sunbury. Elytte was hiding under a blanket in the car, who jumped out and then wrapped a cord around LaFerrara's neck, and Cuckoo Miranda here stabbed him 20 times. In their Honda CR-V, that's what I have. LaFerrara's body was found the next day in a backyard. The lovely couple then went to go buy cleaning supplies so they can clean out their vehicle, and then went to go have a nice dinner. Their motive? Thrill kill. They just wanted to kill someone. Miranda here claimed that she joined a satanic cult when she was 13, and that she had actually murdered 22 people. Yeah, she claims she's a serial killer, but police literally can't verify any of it. Shocker. Sounds like she just wanted to feel somewhat important and have her name in the headlines. 19-year-old Miranda and 22-year-old Elytte pled not guilty to first-degree murder charges, but then later confessed so that they could avoid the death penalty. And on September 18th, 2004, they are both convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Please be mindful of stuff like this. Don't go to strangers' homes or meet strangers. Okay, great, thanks. This is the case of 10-year-old Victoria Martens. Victoria was born on August 23rd, 2006 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where she lived until her final days. On August 23rd, 2016, her 10th birthday, witnesses would see Victoria Kelley, who was babysitting Victoria, carry what looked to be her lifeless body inside the apartment at 10 p.m. A few hours later, neighbors would report to hear extremely loud screaming. And on August 24th, around 4:30 in the morning, Victoria's mother, Michelle, would come out of the apartment, saying that Jessica had attacked them with an iron, and then the police were called. When they arrived, smoke was coming out of the apartment, and the officers entering the apartment would find the dismembered body of 10-year-old Victoria Kelley. She was wrapped up in a blanket and set on fire. She was sexually assaulted, strangled, and stabbed to death. The toxicology report showed that she also had alcohol and methamphetamines in her system. This was apparently to calm her down, in order for them to have intercourse with her. It would be revealed later that her mother, Michelle, used to have men from online come to their house to engage in sexual acts with both of her children while she watched. I can't even fucking process that shit. What the fuck is wrong with people? Michelle Martens, Jessica Kelley, and Fabian Gonzalez were all charged with murder. However, through witness testimony and investigation, it would be revealed that Michelle and Fabian weren't even in the apartment when Victoria was murdered, but Jessica was. They also found the DNA of an unknown male person, who is still unidentified at this time. So the murder charges were dropped against them. Michelle pled guilty to child abuse that led to a death and also to tampering with evidence. She's expected to get 12 to 15 years. In 2018, Jessica Kelley pled no contest to 6 different charges, including child abuse that led to death, great bodily harm, aggravated assault, tampering with evidence, and conspiracy to commit tampering with evidence. Jessica claims the unknown man entered the apartment while she was babysitting and also high on meth, and he was the one to murder the little girl. However, she doesn't know who he is, I guess, and the DNA hasn't matched anyone yet. But the DNA did not match Gonzalez, and this was DNA left on Victoria's body. Fabian Gonzalez has not agreed to any plea deal, and he is the only one still awaiting an actual trial. He is also charged with tampering with evidence and child abuse that led to a death. And they are still holding out hope that they can find the unknown man, because it appears investigators do truly believe that this was the man to have killed the little girl. Victoria was finally laid to rest on October 29th, 2016.
Hey true crimerers, this is the case of the lesbian vampire killers. On the 18th of December 2006, 16-year-old Stacey Mitchell was brutally murdered by 2 so-called friends of hers, Jessica Stanizowski and Valerie Parashumpty. Stacey had been staying with the pair plus another housemate at their house in Perth, Western Australia after running away from home. Little did she know that the pair of girls that she was staying with were violently obsessed with the vampire subculture and blood drinking. Parashumpty was accused by Stanizowski of flirting with Stacey, and so to prove her love and devotion to Stanizowski, Parashumpty plotted to murder her. On the night of the 18th of December 2006, the girls had been drinking whiskey when Parashumpty bludgeoned Stacey to death with a concrete block. In addition to that, Stanizowski strangled her with a dog chain. They then kissed over her dead body and proceeded to film her with a mobile phone, joking about the murder. Her body was then dumped in a wheelie bin in the backyard. During their trial, both girls smiled, giggled, and whispered to each other. And in 2008, both girls were sentenced to life imprisonment with a 24-year minimum. But once in prison, this case got even stranger. In 2009, it was discovered that the girls had been continuing their relationship in prison despite efforts to keep them both apart, and Parashumpty was moved to a separate prison. It was discovered that both girls had been corresponding via Catherine Burney, herself a convicted serial killer. This was a senseless, premeditated murder that ended the life of a 16-year-old girl.
This is the case of Lisandro Jr. Guzman-Feliz. Jr. Guzman-Feliz was born on November 11th, 2002, and he was of Dominican descent. Jr. really wanted to become a police detective. He was actually part of the NYPD Explorers program, a program designed for, you know, the younger people to kind of learn about policing and law enforcement careers. On June 20th, 2018, when Junior was 15 years old, this happened around 10:30 p.m. that night. He just left his apartment and he was looking to go meet a friend. Apparently, when he walked out of the apartment, there were vehicles sort of surrounding the area that gave him some sort of concern. And his concerns were validated because the cars started to chase him, so he was running down the street. Junior would find his way to a bodega store, and this was pretty close to his apartment building. The store owner had actually seen this chase going on, and he was hesitant to really allow Junior into the store, but eventually he let Junior in and let him hide behind the counter. But it didn't matter. One of the gang members noticed him and then grabbed him and yanked him out of the store. The incident that would then occur was captured on CCTV footage I will not be showing or any images from it. There is also cell phone footage of the attack from a neighbor who was upstairs. The footage shows somewhere between 12 to 15 different people, men, surrounding Guzman-Feliz and attacking him. They're coming, they're going. These are 5 of the men. The camera inside of the bodega store actually shows most of the brutality of this attack. They were repeatedly stabbing Guzman-Feliz with a machete, with knives. Junior then managed to re-enter the store, which was just he was right outside the building. But then the store owner made him leave, sent him out. He was stabbed and bleeding to death, and the store owner kicked him out. I get it. You're afraid, you don't want to get involved, you don't want to get attacked as well for, you know, harboring him, but Jesus, that's harsh. The video then shows him stumbling out of the building and running down 183rd Street. Cell phone footage would show him collapsing at the hospital entrance, but unfortunately minutes later he would succumb to his wounds and he died. Later, a Trinitario gang member would go on Snapchat and say that his killing was a case of mistaken identity. Junior wasn't even the man they were looking for. He had no involvement in anything involved with them. He just looked similar to a guy that they were trying to find. They thought he was someone from a rival Sunset gang. 5 of the men would go on trial, and they would be convicted of 1st and 2nd degree murder, gang assault, and conspiracy. All 5 got life sentences without parole. Oh, hello. It's time for another episode of International Killers. But first, I'll stop butchering the Irish accent. On today's International Killers, we're going to Ireland. Look how fucking pretty it is. Well, that's where all the fucking green is. Here in Arizona, we don't got any green. Nothing is green here. So, who are some well-known Irish slayers? Geoffrey Evans and John Shaw. Evans and Shaw here are actually originally from England. Hello, governor, stop it. Just don't even do it, Mike. Now, they were wanted for a series of sexual assaults out there in England. So they fled England and then they headed on over to Ireland. Now, the plan for them was, we're going to go to Ireland. We're going to break into some homes. We're going to steal some shit. We're going to sexually assault some women. We're going to murder some women. But they got caught in the city of Cork. And they actually got put in prison for 2 years for burglary. They never had a chance to actually do the actual assaulting and the murders yet. They were only in prison for 18 months when they got released. And when they did, they fled back to Ireland and never returned to the UK. And these 2 worthless gentlemen said, we're going to kill 1 woman a week. And they started in August of 1976. And unfortunately, they started with 23-year-old Elizabeth Plunkett. She was from Dublin. The 2 dudes met her and then offered to give her a ride home. Instead, they drove her to a nearby woods, where they repeatedly sexually assaulted her, and then they strangled her to death. This was 24-year-old Mary Duffy. In September of 1976, the murderous duo then traveled to Castlebar County, Mayo, and they abducted her when she, too, was looking for a ride home. They sexually assaulted her multiple times in the back of their vehicle. They then drove her to Ballynahinch in Connemara, and there, they tied her to a tree and they sexually assaulted her more. And then when they were done, they murdered her too. Well, these 2 idiots decided to leave their car in plain sight when they were doing this, and they were spotted. And Shaw and Evans were eventually caught by the authorities in Ireland, and they were charged with 2 counts of murder, and they were convicted of murder. Both men received life sentences with no possibility of ever getting out. In 2008, Geoffrey Evans had to have heart surgery, and then he suffered a stroke. He would then slip into a coma. And in 2012, he would die from complications from this. As of 2021, John Shaw is still in prison, and he is considered a high-level risk for reoffending, but for some reason, he's given 2 days a year of temporary release, which I don't understand. Hello, true crimerers! This is the case of the Cheshire Murders, and as usual, viewer discretion is strongly advised. This was the Pettit family from Cheshire, Connecticut. Dr. William Pettit and his wife, Jennifer Hawk Pettit, lived at home with their 2 girls, Haley and Michaela. And this case has very strong similarities to the DC Mansion murders, which I've also covered. On July 22, 2007, after shopping, Jennifer and Michaela, they were followed by an ex-convict named Joshua Komosharzeski, who unfortunately was kinda cute. Piece of shit. So he then got into contact with his friend, fellow criminal, Stephen Hayes. And they basically planned to go after this family that he just randomly found at a grocery store. Stephen sent a text to Joshua, "I'm chomping at the bit to get started. I need a margarita." And, "Are we still on?" Joshua then texted back, "I'm putting the kid to bed. Hold your horses." Then Stephen said, "Dude, the horses want to get loose, LOL. These fuckers are sick." Later that evening, William Pettit had gone to bed, and Jennifer was watching TV, the show Army Wives, with her 2 daughters. Then, around 3 a.m., both men would enter the home through an unlocked door in the basement, where they saw William sleeping in the sunroom. Joshua grabbed a baseball bat that was leaning on the stairs, and he struck William 5 times. They then bound William, and said, "If he moves, put 2 bullets in him." The 2 men then ransacked the house. They were looking for money, and they also found the wife and her 2 daughters, and they tied them all up to their beds. When they uncovered the checkbook of the couple, the 2 asshats decided they were going to do a form of a bank heist. So Stephen Hayes forced Jennifer to go to the bank right at opening and to withdraw $15,000 from her line of credit. This is the surveillance footage of that exact moment. And she told the bank teller everything. And the bank teller called 911. Police would set up a perimeter around the neighborhood, but it didn't do anything. When back at the home, Joshua proceeded to sexually assault 11-year-old Michaela. He even took pictures of the assault. Hayes then sexually assaulted Jennifer on the living room floor. During this, William managed to escape from the basement, where he got to a neighbor's house where the neighbor barely recognized him because his injuries were so bad, and that's when the police were called, even with surveillance around the neighborhood. When they realized that the doctor escaped, Hayes strangled Jennifer to death. They then doused the entire house, including both living girls upstairs, with gasoline, and then they lit the house on fire. The 2 girls would die from smoke inhalation. The surveilling cops caught both of them escaping. They both got sentenced to death, but was commuted to life without parole, because the death penalty was overturned in Connecticut.
G'day, true crimerers. This is the case of the bodies in the barrels. Between 1992 and 1999, these 4 men murdered 12 people, stuffed their bodies into barrels, and stored them all around South Australia. John Bunting, Robert Wagner, Mark Hayden, and James Vasakis all tortured these people before killing them and made attempts to gain their identities in order to get their hands on their social security. Bunting was the chief instigator of this, and he kept a wall that he called the Spider Wall, which he claimed kept track of his victims and their pedophilic homosexual behaviour. They were tracked back to Snowtown in South Australia and arrested only when they found 2 bodies buried in the back of Bunting's house. This court case was the longest in South Australia's criminal history. And Bunting and Wagner both received life without parole, Vasakis 26 years without parole, and Hayden 18 years without parole.
A random freeway shooting that would lead to a planned revenge bombing. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of, I don't know what to call this one. Viewer discretion is advised. So, pictured here was 20-year-old Geoffrey Kane, and he lived in Anchorage, Alaska. On October 19th, 1990, Geoffrey and his friend Robert Chamberlain were out on a drive. They were in Robert's vehicle, and Geoffrey was sitting in the passenger seat. They were on Glen Highway and they were just about to turn off the freeway when all of a sudden a shot rang out and Geoffrey was suddenly quiet. This is because one single gunshot went through the back window and entered through Geoffrey's head. He died instantly. The bullet, the gunshot, where did it come from? No one knew right then. In fact, the police had nothing. They had no evidence. It wouldn't be until a confession where they found out what happened. This was 20-year-old George Kerr. He would go into a police department that day and he would give this story. He, along with two of his friends, Raymond Cheeley and Douglas Gustafson, were all driving on that same freeway that night. George had just recently purchased an HK-91 semi-automatic rifle. They had the gun in the car with them that day. Now, the men in that car did not know Geoffrey or his friend Robert, but allegedly Robert's vehicle cut off their vehicle. So Douglas Gustafson took out his gun and he fired a shot directly through the back window. And then they just took off. It wasn't until the next day they realized they actually hit someone and someone died. So Douglas is like, everyone shut the fuck up, don't say anything to anyone. But George, he would confess. George had nothing to do with the actual murder, but he was in the vehicle, and he didn't do anything to stop Douglas from doing what he did. But for his testimony, there were no charges laid against George Kerr. Raymond was convicted and got 60 years. Douglas got 65. On September 17th, 1991, a package was delivered to the home of the Kerr family. Now, George was not home, but his father and mother were. When they opened the package, a bomb exploded. His father, David, died instantly. His mother was severely injured, but she would survive. Guess what? Turns out that our buddy Gustafson, along with his sister Peggy and brother Craig, they conspired to take George Kerr out. Because I guess they're going by the whole snitches get stitches thing. Peggy tried to build the bomb based on Doug's instructions, but she couldn't do it. So their brother Craig built the bomb. By the way, Peggy was 9 months pregnant when she was trying to build this bomb. Fucking Peggy, bro. By the way, they planned all of this over prison phone calls which were recorded. Peggy got 24 years, Craig got 22, and Craig got life. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Onion Field killing. This dude here is named Gregory Powell. He was born August 2nd, 1933, and he was raised in Michigan. By age 15, he had a sexual relationship with a priest. And around that age, he would also begin his life of stealing, theft, robbery. He even went to jail at one point in Michigan for stealing a car. March 9th, 1963, he would be 30 years old. Gregory and his partner in crime, Jimmy Lee Smith, they had just committed a string of thefts. They were out gallivanting in their 1946 Ford Coupe when they made a U-turn, which was illegal, and they were spotted by officers Ian Campbell and Carl Hettinger. Jimmy Lee Smith, pictured here, he would later say that when both cops were approaching the car that him and Gregory both had their guns at the ready. Officer Campbell approached the side with Gregory, and that's when Gregory pulled out his gun, pointed it directly at the officer's head, and flat out told him, "I'm gonna kill you if you don't drop your gun." Officer Hettinger still had his gun pointed at the suspects. He didn't lower his weapon until his partner, Campbell, told him to do so. So, Powell, with the help of Smith, overtook both officers and kidnapped them. And they actually forced Officer Campbell to drive, and they were told to drive to a nearby onion field. And this would be in Bakersfield, California. When they arrived at the onion field, both officers were forced out of the vehicle at gunpoint. They were ordered to stand with their hands above their heads. Gregory Powell had allegedly asked Officer Ian Campbell, "Have you ever heard of the Little Limburg Law?" which was a law that allowed federal authorities to cross state lines to investigate kidnappings that were taken over a state line. So Officer Campbell answered yes to his question. And immediately after that, Gregory Powell just shot Officer Campbell in the face. You see, the reason why he asked that question about the Limburg Law was because he was under the impression that kidnapping officers would be an immediate capital offense, which would mean the death sentence. So that's why he said, well, we just killed him because we were already committing a capital offense. But that wasn't true about the law. It only becomes a capital crime at the time if you demanded a ransom or committed a violent act against the kidnapped victim. Officer Hettinger, right after the shooting, he said, you know what, I'm the next one to go, so he just took off. And both men started firing at him, but they missed him. Officer Campbell would be shot 4 more times in the chest. Both men would be arrested very quickly. Jimmy Smith brought him to the crime scene to recreate what happened. Powell was convicted and sentenced to death, which was later commuted, then he got life. Smith got life too. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case known as the Corpsewood Manor Murders. Viewer discretion is advised. Pictured on the right is Dr. Charles Scudder. Well, he got tired of city life, so he said, you know what, I'm going to pick up and I'm going to move somewhere desolate and quiet. And he brought along his sometimes lover, Joe Odom, pictured on the left. The two of them would go on to build what is called Corpsewood Manor, and it would eventually live up to its name. They also built a 3-story chicken coop. Wasn't just for chickens. Again, viewer discretion is advised. Thanks. The first floor was used for chickens. The second floor was used for, dirty photos and magazines, huh? The third floor they called the Pink Room, which would be their, pleasure chamber. Dr. Scudder, well, he wasn't just a closeted gay man. He was also, well, he was a member of the Church of Satan. The fuck? He was also a fan of the drug, LSD. In fact, he had about 12,000 doses of LSD with him. He also had human skulls, you know. I imagine he used them as doorstops or pleasure chamber stuff. A nice vase for flowers. December 12th, 1982. Corpsewood Manor would house a couple of corpses. You see, the couple would entertain strangers at their home. You know, kind of like Airbnb, maybe? I guess they would use Zach Morris phones for that to schedule? I don't know. Well, that night they had 17-year-old Kenneth Avery Brock and 30-year-old Samuel Tony West. They were staying at Corpsewood Manor. You see, the 17-year-old was indulging in sexual acts with the doctor, and Samuel West, he's like, nah, I'm not having any of that. But he was getting free alcohol and free drugs like LSD. Well, this tandem here decided, you know what? We're gonna rob them. They live in this cool-looking manor, they must have money. They also brought along 2 teenagers, one named Joey Wells, and another one named Teresa Hudgens. They were more like the lookout. Things were never meant to go violent, but they went violent. You see, they were also on drugs while doing this. Brock went to go retrieve a rifle, and he shot and killed Joe Odom. They then dragged Dr. Scudder, well, to go see what they just did. They didn't realize that this house, there was no money in it. There was no valuables at all. This was the home of basically recluses. So then they shot Dr. Scudder 5 times in the head. The pair fled to Mississippi where they killed someone else, and they were all eventually caught. Brock was sentenced to 3 life terms. West got death. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case known as the Pizza Hut Murders. On a chilly January evening in 1999, 3 Pizza Hut employees, 20-year-old Melissa Monitz, 17-year-old James Bloxam, and 44-year-old store manager Robert Curry were closing up the store for the night. Right before closing, 2 men walked into the restaurant. Failed vice president of the Hair Club for Men and Captain Pixel, Bo Huristel, and Tom Prasserpong. And they had gone in there, assumedly with the intention of robbing the place. Now, later on, when these 2 men were being tried, Bo would say that he was in the bathroom while Tom suddenly killed everyone. And at Tom's trial, he said that he was in the bathroom when Bo was out there killing everyone. And when both came out of the bathroom, they were both shocked at the horror they were seeing. But the final result was the same regardless. These 3 Tucson, Arizona residents, these sons, daughters, friends, they had all been shot dead on that January evening in 1999. And it appears that really not much was stolen. Their bodies would be discovered from outside the window when one of the family members was there to pick their loved one up. but everything inside looked hauntingly dark, and there was no movement, so he peered in the window, and that is when he discovered the bodies. The two men were dead on the scene. Melissa would die a little bit later at the hospital. The inside of the Pizza Hut just looked like a bloodbath. The two men who fired the fatal shots, they fled and they were nowhere to be seen. By the way, the Pizza Hut would be demolished some short time afterwards. Now, before all this happened, these two men did in fact eat at the restaurant. And detectives, after the fact, were able to pull DNA from items that were left at a table. The table where these two men ate, allegedly. The morning after the murders, police got a call from a man named Josh Simmons, who said his friend Bo Hurritzel confessed to murdering the three people, along with his friend Tom. And these two were promptly arrested, and the DNA from the food would match both of these men. So initially, both were separately tried and convicted of first-degree murder, and they were both sentenced to death. Tom's death sentence would be overturned because the judge had coerced the jury into sentencing that. Bo's conviction would be overturned altogether, again because of issues with the judge. He would then be tried again for first-degree murder and found not guilty. Then they would try to retry him again for second-degree murder. Instead of going through a trial, he would plead guilty to second-degree murder. Tom has got life without parole. Bo could be paroled after 25 years, and he probably will be. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Golden Dragon Massacre. Viewer discretion is advised. The Golden Dragon was a popular restaurant located in the Chinatown district of San Francisco, California. 44 years ago, on September 4th, 1977, a horrifying tragedy would occur inside the restaurant within a 60-second span of time. Now, at this point in the 70s, there was a feud between two different Chinatown gangs. One of them was called the Joe Boys, and the other was called Hua Ching. These two rival gangs controlled different parts of San Francisco. Now, the Joe Boys were once a part of Hua Ching, but then they splintered off sometime in the 60s. On the 4th of July in 1977, at the Ping Yuan, or Peace Garden Apartments, there was a shootout between the two gangs with regards to fireworks sales. And a member of the Joe Boys was killed, and another member of the Joe Boys was seriously injured. So the Joe Boys, they wanted to retaliate. Over the course of the summer of 1977, the Joe Boys would plan an attack. They were going to take out leaders of the Hua Ching gang. So on September 4th, 1977, at around 2 o'clock in the morning, one of the leaders of the Joe Boys was given word that there were several members of the Hua Ching leadership at the Golden Dragon. So 5 members of the gang hopped in their car, which they had actually stolen, and they drove it to the Golden Dragon restaurant. Took them about 40 minutes to get there. They had been acquiring several different weapons. I'm going to cover some of it just so I'm not showing too much. They had a .45 caliber rifle. They had 2 separate 12-gauge shotguns and also a .38 caliber revolver. The 3 members who would go into the restaurant would first put on nylon stockings over their face. They would equip all of the guns they had acquired, and they entered the restaurant. Now, initially the plan was to go in methodically, fire a round into the ceiling, wait for the patrons to all drop to the ground, and they would be able to discern which ones were the rival gang members. But that's not what happened. They walked in and just opened fire. They just shot at everyone. They would injure 11 people, and they would kill 5 people. Not one person who was hit was a member of any of the gangs. They were all literally innocent bystanders. Some of them were tourists. I don't have pictures of all of the victims, but here are 2 of them. A week later, a retaliation shootout occurred. More gang members died. Police were able to arrest the perpetrators who shot up the restaurant. They all served time but are now free. Buried underneath the concrete of this basement would be the victims of 2 of Britain's most notorious serial killers. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Fred and Rosemary West. Viewer discretion is advised. There is a ton of detail to this story, so I have to leave a lot out. To sum up both of their childhoods, both of them grew up in households where they were sexually assaulted by their own family. There was even incestuous pregnancies. This charming couple would meet in 1969 when Rosemary was just 15 years old. Now, by the time they met, both of them had children with other people. They would also end up having 7 children together. Fred West was in prison in 1971, so one of his children, Sharmon, was being looked after by Rosemary. Rosemary didn't like having to take care of children that weren't hers, so she killed her. She killed Sharmon. She was only 8 years old. Rosemary initially buried the body in the cellar of their home, and then when Fred got back from prison, he would remove the body's fingers and then rebury her in the yard. Fred's ex-wife Rena and mother of Charlemagne went to their house to confront him, and she was then never seen again. Her body would be found much later on, and she had been dismembered. It's believed that she was strangled to death. She was then put in several garbage bags and then buried in a field. Rosemary then became a woman of the night, if you know what I mean, and she would perform her services in their home, with the children around, of course, and good old Creeper Peeper Fred here, he drilled a hole in the wall so he could watch. Some of the 7 children they had together weren't actually all his. Some of them belonged to her Johns. One of those children might have also been her own father's child. Oh my god. This is not the Brady Bunch, folks. The other children were abused, sexually assaulted, the whole shebang. In 1972, they hired Carolyn Owens to be their nanny. Well, then they kidnapped her, sexually assaulted her. When she managed to convince them, don't worry, I'll still be your nanny, so they wouldn't kill her, and they believed her and they let her go. She went to police. They didn't believe her. 3 months later, they would begin a murder spree. Between 1973 and 1979, they would go on to kill at least 12 women. One of them being one of their own children, Heather West. These are women that they would have abducted. Some of them were women of the night. The majority of them would be dismembered and buried underneath their basement floor. One of their children, Louise. Fred began to sexually assault her and then he video recorded it. She got up the courage to tell a friend what happened. The friend went to the police. To cut a long story short, a warrant was served. They found the bodies. Both were arrested in 1992. Both charged with multiple murders. In 1995, Fred unalived himself in his prison cell. She was convicted of 10 murders. Black Friday is a dangerous day full of crazy people. But for one retail worker, it would prove to be deadly. Hello, true crimerers. This is the Black Friday case of Ashley Harris. Viewer discretion is advised. On Friday, November 28th, 2014, the day after Thanksgiving, police and firefighters would be called to an apartment complex in Fort Worth, Texas. One of the apartment buildings was on fire. Once the fire was contained, they entered the building. They would uncover the partially burnt body of Ashley Harris. The fire appeared to have originated from the bed, and her body as well also appeared to be another starting point for the fire. Investigators found a bottle of rubbing alcohol on the ground. Ashley had been bound with duct tape with her arms behind her back. Her ankles were also tied up with duct tape. This is her bed that was completely burnt, and she was lying face down on the ground nearby. Ashley also had a slit across her throat, and the coroner would rule that she also was strangled. The only thing missing from her apartment were her keys that had her car key and her work key. So, what the hell? How did we get here? So, neighbors would report they saw a strange vehicle that they've never seen in their parking lot before. It was a black Infiniti G35, and a neighbor saw this car speeding out of the parking lot sometime after 7:30 a.m. Another neighbor heard a loud scream sometime around 7:30. So let's backtrack a bit. Ashley worked at the Hulen Mall, specifically at the American Eagle store. Ashley used to work at that store with a woman named Carter Cervantes. Carter was a manager there. Now, Carter had hired her boyfriend, Clarence Mallory, to work at the American Eagle. Now, he wasn't allowed to be working there because he was already in American Eagle's system as not rehirable. So Carter fudged some information, changed his name a bit, changed his social security number a bit, so that he could work there. Well, one night, Carter accidentally left the door unlocked and left her keys behind. This was on August 24th, 2014. That same night, someone broke in and stole $18,000 from the safe. Here's just more footage of that person leaving. Because of Carter's mistake, Ashley suspended Carter from working at the American Eagle. And then their main boss, Chris Cravey, fired Carter. Now, fast forward back to Black Friday, Chris Cravey would say, yeah, I know someone who owns that black vehicle, Carter Cervantes. Police investigated them. On Carter's phone, they found images of them staking out Ashley's apartment. The day after the murder, someone tried to use Ashley's keys to break into the store. They had already changed the locks, though. They were arrested. Their plan was to rob the Black Friday sales. They were convicted, and both got life without parole. They would only ever find his head. Yeah, it's one of those. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Greg May. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this story, Greg was living in Bellevue, Iowa. He was actually a talented tattoo artist. He even ran his own tattoo shop in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin for like 20 years. But by the end of 2000, he would hang up the old tattoo needle? I don't know. And that's when he would move to Bellevue, Iowa. Greg was also really into antiques, specifically Civil War memorabilia. And he owned a pretty valuable collection, stuff that would be worth a lot of money. Now, Greg didn't live alone. He actually had two roommates. A man by the name of Douglas DeBruin, who I cannot find a picture of. Apparently, he also went by the name Moose. I go by the name Chunky Bear. I'm okay now. Now, Doug had a girlfriend, Julie Miller, pictured here, and she lived with them too. Greg was kind of like a nomad. It wasn't too uncommon for him to kind of fall off the grid for maybe a few days, but his family was having a hell of a time trying to get a hold of him. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and they still had heard nothing. Greg had been considering a move to Florida, so there was something kind of floating in the back of his family's head, like maybe he did it, and that's why he's sort of fallen off the grid for a bit. But Greg's ex-wife, who actually lived in California, and they had 2 children together, she felt something was off. Something was wrong. So they reported him missing. And they did so in January of 2001, and then a couple of months later, they found his car abandoned. March 2005. A bucket full of concrete would be found at a truck stop in Missouri. Encased in that bucket of cement was a human skull. So they had a forensic expert who specializes in, the clay thing over skulls. And so they came up with this, and then people would identify that as Greg May. So back in 2001 when he disappeared, they went back to his home. It had been cleaned out. Again, not too unusual for him. His Civil War collection was completely gone, for sure. And then all of a sudden, his Civil War items were popping up kind of all over the country. Illinois, Missouri. Police needed to find Julie Miller and Douglas DeBruin. They were actually found and arrested in Flagstaff, Arizona back in 2001. And Julie finally caved. Douglas strangled Greg to death, and the 2 of them dismembered his body. Doug was given life without parole. Due to her cooperation, Julie only got 5 years.